Évidemment, commençons par la situation ici au Canada. We're entering the third week of illegal blockades that have been disrupting the lives of too many Canadians. Here in our capital city, families and small businesses have been enduring illegal obstruction of their neighborhoods, occupying streets, harassing people, breaking the law. This is not a peaceful protest. At the borders in different parts of the country, the blockades are harming our economy and endangering public safety. Critical supply chains have been disrupted. This is hurting workers who rely on these jobs to feed their families. Yesterday, the Ambassador Bridge was reopened between Windsor and Detroit. Our team and I have been working with Ontario and the City of Windsor around the clock. I want to thank the officers on the ground, including the RCMP, who played an active role. We now have a responsibility to make sure that the bridge stays open. With each illegal blockade, local law enforcement agencies have been acting to keep the peace within their jurisdiction. Despite their best efforts, it is now clear that there are serious challenges to law enforcement's ability to effectively enforce the law. On Friday, Ontario invoked a state of emergency to respond to the blockades. This was the responsible and necessary thing to do. Today, to continue building on these efforts, the federal government is ready to use more tools at its disposal to get the situation fully under control. After discussing with Cabinet and caucus, after consultation with premiers from all provinces and territories, after speaking with opposition leaders, the federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations. I want to be very clear. The scope of these measures will be time-limited, geographically targeted, as well as reasonable and proportionate to the threats they are meant to address. The Emergencies Act will be used to strengthen and support law enforcement agencies at all levels across the country. This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, and restoring confidence in our institutions. Here's how the measures we're taking today will help get the situation under control. The police will be given more tools to restore order in places where public assemblies can constitute illegal and dangerous activities, such as blockades and occupations, as seen in Ottawa, the Ambassador Bridge, and elsewhere. These tools include strengthening their ability to impose fines or imprisonment. The government will designate, secure, and protect places and infrastructure that are critical to our economy and people's jobs, including border crossings and airports. We cannot and will not allow illegal and dangerous activities to continue. The Emergencies Act will also allow the government to make sure essential services are rendered, for example, in order to tow vehicles blocking roads. In addition, financial institutions will be authorized or directed to render essential services to help address the situation, including by regulating and prohibiting the use of property to fund or support illegal blockades. And finally, it will enable the RCMP to enforce municipal bylaws and provincial offences where required. This is what the Emergencies Act does. Let me be equally clear about what it does not do. We're not using the Emergencies Act to call in the military. We're not suspending fundamental rights or overriding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are not limiting people's freedom of speech. We are not limiting freedom of peaceful assembly. We are not preventing people from exercising their right to protest legally. We are reinforcing the principles, values, and institutions that keep all Canadians free. Après des discussions avec le Conseil des ministres et le caucus, après avoir consulté les premiers ministres de toutes les provinces et tous les territoires, et après avoir parlé avec les chefs de l'opposition, le gouvernement fédéral invoque la loi sur les mesures d'urgence pour compléter les pouvoirs provinciaux et territoriaux visant à gérer l'occupation et les barrages illégaux. Je veux être très clair. Ces mesures vont être limitées dans le temps et ciblées géographiquement. Elles vont être raisonnables et proportionnelles aux menaces à la sécurité du Canada. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence va renforcer et soutenir le travail des policiers. On ne se sert pas de la loi des mesures d'urgence pour déployer l'armée. On ne suspend pas les droits fondamentaux prévus dans la Charte des droits et libertés. On ne limite pas la liberté d'expression ni le droit de manifester pacifiquement. Ce qu'on veut, c'est d'assurer la sécurité des Canadiens, protéger les emplois des travailleurs et rétablir la confiance dans nos institutions. The Emergencies Act is not something that's been used ever, but it exists for a reason. Invoking the Emergencies Act is never the first thing a government should do, nor even the second. The act is to be used sparingly and as a last resort. Right now, the situation requires additional tools not held by any other federal, provincial, or territorial law. Today, in these circumstances, it is now clear that responsible leadership requires us to do this. These measures must be and will be compliant with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Indeed, the Emergencies Act was created in the late 80s to flow from and uphold the Charter. We'll always defend the rights of Canadians to peaceful assembly and to freedom of expression, but these blockades are illegal, and if you're still participating, the time to go home is now. On a separate track from the Emergencies Act, I want to reassure people that the Canadian Border Services Agency is already turning back non-Canadians trying to enter Canada to participate in blockades. And of course, while we get the situation under control, we'll continue to have Canadians' backs. I want to remind affected businesses that if you're facing revenue losses, support is available through our wage and rent subsidy programs. We know that downtown Ottawa businesses in particular have been hard hit by these illegal activities. In the coming days, we'll be launching specific support for those businesses. I know that everyone is tired of this pandemic. We're hearing your frustration with COVID and even with the temporary measures we had to put forward to keep people safe. I know people are frustrated. I hear it. You have a right to express that frustration and even your anger with the government or government policies. It's something we'll always defend in this free and democratic country. But blockading streets and critical infrastructure and depriving your neighbors of their freedoms is a totally different thing. It has to stop. Tout le monde est fatigué de la pandémie. Il y a d'autres façons de vous exprimer que de participer à des activités illégales et dangereuses. Comme le ministre Duclos l'a dit la semaine passée, les mesures de santé publique sont constamment réévaluées et on va continuer de les modifier en fonction de la science On va
modify
justement
them
avoir
according
quelques
to
annonces à
science.
faire
In fact,
à ce
we
sujet
will be
dans les
making some
prochains jours.
announcements on that subject in the coming days.
Today, I also want to speak briefly about our support for Ukraine. On Saturday, I spoke with President Zelensky to reaffirm Canada's steadfast support and to continue to do whatever we can to support Ukraine. Durant la fin de semaine, j'ai aussi des
During
appels
the
avec le
weekend,
président du
I
Conseil
also
européen,
spoke
Charles
to
Michel,
the
avec le
Charles
chancelier
Michel,
Scholz de
as well
l'Allemagne
as
et avec le
Chancellor Scholz
président
of
Duda
Germany
de la
and
Pologne.
President Duda of Poland.
As part of the collective G7 response to support Ukraine's economic resilience, today we're announcing that Canada will offer a loan of up to $500 million to the government of Ukraine. I want to thank Deputy Prime Minister Freeland for her leadership on this file and underline that this is in addition to the $120 million loan offered earlier in January. On top of financial support, Canada has already taken steps to help Ukraine defend itself, including with the extension of the training mission Operation Unifier. In light of the seriousness of the situation and following conversations with our Ukrainian partners, I've approved the provision of $7.8 million worth of lethal equipment and ammunition. This responds to Ukraine's specific request and is in addition to the non-lethal equipment we've already provided. The intent of this support from Canada and other partners is to deter further Russian aggression. En raison du sérieux de la situation, et après avoir
Given the
soigneusement
seriousness of the
examiné la
situation,
question,
and
j'ai
after
approuvé
having
la demande de l'Ukraine
closely
de leur
studied
envoyer
the issue,
de
I
l'armement
asked,
et des munitions.
I
Le
told
Canada
Ukraine
se
we would
joint
send them
donc aux
arms and
États-Unis,
munitions. So
au
Canada is
Royaume-Uni,
joining
à la
the United
Bulgarie, la
States,
République
the
tchèque,
UK,
l'Estonie, la
Bulgaria,
Lettonie,
Czech
la
Republic,
Lituanie, aux Pays-Bas et à la Pologne
Lithuania,
dans l'envoi
the
d'armement.
Netherlands, and Poland in
Le
sending
but de ce
arms.
soutien de la part du Canada et de nos
The
autres
goal of the
partenaires
support
est de
from
dissuader la
Canada and our
Russie
other partners
de
is
poursuivre
to
son agression
dissuade
contre
Russia from
l'Ukraine.
pursuing its aggression
We're
towards
not
Ukraine.
seeking confrontation with Russia, but the situation is intensifying rapidly, and we are showing our resolve. It's important for Canadians and the world to know that Canada will continue supporting Ukraine and its independence, integrity, sovereignty, including its right to defend itself. Merci tout le monde. Je cède maintenant la
Thank you,
parole
everyone.
à la vice-première ministre.
I will now give
Freeland.
the floor to Deputy Prime Minister Freeland.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
À travers le monde, les
Across the
démocraties
monde,
libérales sont
across the world, liberal
confrontées à des
democracies are being
menaces
confronted
sérieuses
with
et
serious
répétées.
and repeated
Nous
threats.
avons peut-être pensé
Perhaps
et
we thought,
peut-être même
perhaps,
espéré
and we perhaps
que
even
le
hoped
Canada serait
that
épargné.
Canada would be spared.
Depuis 2 semaines et demie,
For the last
nous
2.5
avons
weeks,
réalisé
we have
que
realized
ce n'est pas le cas.
that this is not the case.
Ce siège et ces barrages
This
causent des
siege and these
dommages
blockades
importants
are
à
causing
notre
major
économie,
damage to our economy
à nos institutions démocratiques
and are harming our
et à la
democratic
réputation
institutions
du
as well
Canada
as Canada's
dans le monde.
reputation in the world.
La confiance internationale
International
envers le Canada
confidence towards Canada
comme un endroit propice aux investissements
as a good
et
place to
pour
invest
faire des affaires
and do
est
business
ébranlée.
has been shaken.
These illegal barricades are doing great damage to Canada's economy and to our reputation as a reliable trading partner. The blockade of the Ambassador Bridge has affected about $390 million in trade each day. This bridge supports 30% of all trade by road between Canada and the United States, our most important trading partner. In Coutts, Alberta, about $48 million in daily trade has been affected by the blockades. In Emerson, Manitoba, about $73 million in daily trade has been affected by the blockades. These costs are real. They threaten businesses, big and small, and they threaten the livelihoods of Canadian workers, just as we are all working so hard to recover from the economic damage caused by COVID. Nous nous sommes battus bec et ongle pour protéger
We
la
fought
relation
so hard
privilégiée
to
du
protect
Canada
Canada's
avec les
privileged
États-Unis
relationship with the United
lors des
States
négociations de l'ALENA.
when we
Et
were
nous nous
negotiating
sommes tenus
NAFTA.
debout face au tarif 232
We
qui
stood up to
étaient
tariff
illégaux
232, which were
et
illegal
injustifiés.
and unjustified.
Nous ne laisserons pas ces victoires durement gagnées
We will
être
never
ternies.
let those hard-won
Le
victories
monde
be
nous
tarnished.
regarde.
The world is watching
Nos
us.
emplois, notre
Our
prospérité
jobs
et
our
nos
prosperity
gagnes-pagnes sont en jeu.
and
C'est pourquoi notre gouvernement agit.
our livelihoods are in
Nous
danger.
sommes
That is
résolus
why our government
et
is acting.
déterminés.
We are resolute and
Ces
determined.
barrages illégaux
These
doivent
illegal
être
blockades
levés
must be
et
lifted,
ils le seront.
and they will be.
As part of invoking the Emergencies Act, we are announcing the following immediate actions. First, we are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use. These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets, such as cryptocurrencies. The illegal blockades have highlighted the fact that crowdfunding platforms and some of the payment service providers they use are not fully captured under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. Our banks and financial institutions are already obligated to report to the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, or FINTRAC. As of today, all crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use must register with FINTRAC, and they must report large and suspicious transactions to FINTRAC. This will help mitigate the risk that these platforms receive illicit funds, increase the quality and quantity of intelligence received by FINTRAC, and make more information available to support investigations by law enforcement into these illegal blockades. We are making these changes because we know that these platforms are being used to support illegal blockades and illegal activity, which is damaging the Canadian economy. The government will also bring forward legislation to provide these authorities to FINTRAC on a permanent basis. Second, the government is issuing an order with immediate effect under the Emergencies Act, authorizing Canadian financial institutions to temporarily cease providing financial services where the institution suspects that an account is being used to further the illegal blockades and occupations. This order covers both personal and corporate accounts. Third, we are directing Canadian financial institutions to review their relationships with anyone involved in the illegal blockades and report to the RCMP or CSIS. As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability for actions taken in good faith. Federal government institutions will have a new broad authority to share relevant information with banks and other financial service providers to ensure that we can all work together to put a stop to the funding of these illegal blockades. This is about following the money. This is about stopping the financing of these illegal blockades. We are today serving notice. If your truck is being used in these illegal blockades, your corporate accounts will be frozen. The insurance on your vehicle will be suspended. Send your semi-trailers home. The Canadian economy needs them to be doing legitimate work, not to be illegally making us all poorer. Il s'agit de suivre l'argent.
It's all about
Il
following the
s'agit
money.
de mettre fin au
It's
financement
about
de
putting an
ces
end to
blocages
the funding of
illégaux.
these illegal blockades.
Considérez-vous avertis.
Consider
Si
yourselves
votre
warned.
camion est utilisé
If your
dans
truck
ces blocages,
is used in these
vos
blockades,
comptes d'entreprise
your corporate
seront
accounts
gelés.
will be frozen.
L'assurance de votre
The
véhicule
insurance on your
sera
vehicle
suspendue.
will be suspended.
Renvoyez vos remorques chez eux.
Send your rigs home.
L'économie canadienne a besoin
The
qu'ils
Canadian
fassent un
economy
travail
needs them
légitime
to do
et
legitimate
pas
work
qu'ils nous rendent tout illégalement plus
and not
pauvres.
make us
Nous
all
annonçons
poorer
ces mesures
illegally.
après mûre réflexion.
We've enforced these
Je me suis
taken
entretenue
these measures
directement
after
avec les dirigeants
deep
des
thought.
banques canadiennes.
I have
Je tiens à les remercier
discussed
de
this
faire
with the heads
le
of Canadian
nécessaire
banks. I thank them
pour
for doing
assurer le
what is
respect des
necessary
lois
to ensure
et de
laws
la
are being
démocratie
complied with
canadienne et
and
pour
that
protéger notre
Canadian
économie.
democracy is being protected as
Team
well as
Canada
our
has stood
economy.
together over the past 2 years. We have trusted one another. We've leaned on one another. What we are facing today is a threat to our democratic institutions, to our economy, and to peace, order, and good government in Canada. This is unacceptable. It cannot stand, and it will not stand. Thank you. And I'll now turn over the floor to my colleague, our Attorney General, Minister of Justice, David Lametti.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, Prime Minister, colleagues, Canadians. Good afternoon. Canada is a rule of law country. By declaring a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act, we are following the law and we are acting within it. There are clear conditions set out in the Emergencies Act in order for a public order emergency to be declared. Our government believes that those conditions have been met. And that requires the Government of Canada to act. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence existe
The
depuis
Emergency
1988
Measures Act has existed since
et a remplacé
1988
la loi
and
sur les mesures de
replaced
guerre.
the War Measures Act.
Elle est différente de cette dernière de deux
different
façons
from the
très
previous
importantes.
act in two
Premièrement,
important ways.
La loi
First
sur
of
les
all,
mesures d'urgence contient plusieurs balises
Emergencies
et
Act
sauvegardes, dont un
Has
examen
several ways of
parlementaire.
safeguarding
Deuxièmement,
measures,
les
including
mesures
parliamentary
prises en
review.
vertu de la
Secondly,
loi
measures
doivent
taken under this
respecter
act
la Charte
must
canadienne des droits
comply
et
and
libertés.
observe the Canadian
The Emergencies
Charter of
Act
Rights
can
and
only be
Freedoms.
invoked in specific, serious circumstances that amount to a national emergency. For a situation to be qualified as a national emergency, 3 conditions must be met. First, we must be in a situation that either seriously endangers lives, health, or safety of Canadians and exceeds the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. Second, the provinces and territories' capacity to handle the situation must be considered insufficient or must show gaps. And third, we must conclude that the situation cannot be handled adequately under any other Canadian law, including provincial laws and territorial laws. Une fois l'urgence déclarée, la
Once
loi
the
sur les
emergency has been
mesures
declared,
d'urgence permet au
the
gouvernement
Emergencies Act
fédéral
allows the
d'adopter
federal
les
government
décrets
to
ou les
adopt
règlements nécessaires pour
rules
intervenir.
or decrees in order to
Notre gouvernement respecte les droits et libertés des Canadiens, tels
Our
que
government
protégés par la
respects
Charte.
Canadians' rights and
C'est
freedoms
notre
as protected under
intention
the Charter.
d'utiliser
It is our intention
uniquement les pouvoirs
to
nécessaires,
use only
raisonnables
the
et
necessary,
mesurés
reasonable,
pour résoudre
reasonable
la
and measured
crise de
powers in
façon
order to
rapide
resolve this
et
crisis
sécuritaire.
quickly and safely.
The Emergencies Act also contains a number of significant limits, checks, and safeguards. As required by the Act earlier today, and on occasion over the past week, the Prime Minister and members of Cabinet have consulted with premiers and members of their respective governments. Having now declared a public order emergency, we will table the declaration in Parliament as required within 7 days. In the coming days, a parliamentary committee will be struck to provide oversight while the emergency is in effect. The declaration only lasts for 30 days unless renewed. However, we can and sincerely hope to revoke the emergency much sooner. Parliament also has the ability to revoke the declaration of the emergency as set out clearly in the Act. Once an emergency is declared, the Emergencies Act permits the federal government to make necessary orders or regulations to deal with the emergency. The Prime Minister gave the broad outline of these in his remarks. There are 6 specific measures we feel are needed to bring this situation under control. First, the regulation and prohibition of public assemblies that lead to a breach of peace and go beyond lawful protest. What we are seeing in Ottawa and what we are seeing at the Ambassador Bridge are not lawful protests. Second, designating and securing places where blockades are to be prohibited. This could include borders, approaches to borders, and other critical infrastructures, or Ottawa. Directing persons to render essential services to relieve impacts of blockades on Canada's economy. And this could include tow trucks and their drivers, for compensation, of course. Authorizing or directing financial institutions to render essential services to relieve the impact of blockades, including, as we have heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, regulating and prohibiting the use of property to fund or support the blockades. Measures enabling the RCMP to enforce municipal bylaws and provincial offences where required. And finally, the imposition of fines or imprisonment for a contravention of any more order or regulation made under Section 19 of the Emergencies Act. Les décrets et règlements qui permettront de concrétiser les mesures seront
These measures that
élaborés
will
sous peu
allow us
et déposés
to
devant
move
le
forward
Parlement
under
dans
the
les 2
Act
jours
will
de
soon
séance
be
suivant la
and
date de
tabled
leur
before
prise,
Parliament
comme la
in
loi, comme
the 2
exige
days
la loi.
following their
Le
implementation
Parlement
as
a le
as
pouvoir de
required by law.
révoquer un
Parliament
décret,
has the
ce qui
power
assure que
to
toutes les mesures
revoke
prises le seront de manière responsable,
the emergency,
mesurée
which means
et
that
dans
all
le
measures
respect des balises
taken
établies.
will be reasonable
In
and
closing,
appropriate.
I want to emphasize one point clearly. These measures are temporary. We intend to impose them for only as long as needed to restore order across the country. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister Lametti. The Prime Minister and ministers will be taking 30 minutes of questions, starting in the foyer. Le Premier ministre et les ministres prendront 30 minutes de questions, en commençant avec les journalistes dans la salle, starting with David Turton from CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister. A number of premiers today have come out and said that they don't want or need the federal government to exercise its emergency powers in their provinces. So I'm just wondering, how do you respond to the premiers who've come out today and said that?
I thank the premiers for having had the conversation with me this morning. It was extremely important to talk about what was happening right across the country. We have seen challenges across the country that are linked to what we are seeing here in Ottawa, what we're seeing at border crossings. But allow me to repeat what I said before. The measures brought in today are geographically specific and targeted only to where they are needed. These are not blanket powers across the country. These will be tools that can be used where and when necessary so that the police of jurisdiction dealing with blockades or occupations have the tools necessary and can draw on RCMP resources as necessary to keep Canadians safe, to restore confidence in the rule of law and in our institutions, and to make sure that our economy continues to recover from the impacts of COVID-19 over the past 2 years.
At least one other premier said that invoking this act is like putting oil on a raging fire. Words along those lines. Do you think you're inflaming the situation even more by invoking this?
My focus is on Canadians who've had a long 2 years, who've been through a pandemic, who've lost loved ones, who've seen businesses struggle, who've lost jobs, and just want this to be over. They're exhausted. We're all exhausted. We're all frustrated by the pandemic. For those people who disagree with the measures that governments put in place to keep Canadians safe, to ensure that we would make it through this pandemic better than many of our peer countries, those people have gone from protesting and disagreeing with those measures to limiting and blocking the freedoms of their fellow citizens, hurting jobs, hurting lives and livelihoods, endangering public safety, and weakening our country, not just right now, but for times to come in the eyes of our most important trading partners. These illegal blockades are hurting Canadians, and they need to stop. Every step of the way, we have been there to support the police of jurisdiction. We've been there with tools and resources to help end these blockades. But it is clear that there are more tools necessary. And that is why we are moving forward with time-limited, geographically specific, extremely bounded measures and additional powers that will allow us to get through these blockades and occupations and get back to the business of rebuilding our lives and our country after this pandemic.
Next question.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Marc Chabot-Johnson, Radio-Canada.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau, Radio-Canada.
Comme on disait, là, c'est sûr qu'il y a certains
As we
critères
were
qui vont
saying,
devoir être
obviously
rencontrés et tout ça,
certain criteria will have
mais
to
des
be
premiers
met.
ministres de certaines provinces ont
but
déjà dit contre.
Certain premiers have
Si des
already
critères étaient
spoken
nécessaires
out
selon vous, est-ce que vous seriez prêt à aller
these
de l'avant
measures.
dans des provinces
Would
qui
you
ne
be
veulent
prepared
pas
to go
avoir la
forward
loi
in,
appliquée?
to
Les
move forward in
conversations
provinces who do not
que nous
agree
sommes
with
en
the
train
application of this
d'avoir
act?
avec tous nos partenaires à
Answer,
travers
in
le pays
conversations
et avec
that we're having
les polices
across
de
the country,
juridiction
as well
qui
as
sont
with
en train
with
de
premiers and
gérer
as well as
différentes
police
situations à
services, we
travers
are
le pays
working on managing
vont
various
continuer.
situations across the country.
C'est
And those
cette
conversations will
loi sur
continue.
les mesures d'urgence
The
est là
Emergencies
pour
Act
donner des
is
outils
there to provide us
additionnels
with additional tools
aux forces policières en
and
place
provide additional
pour
tools
pouvoir
to the
régler
police
les
services that are on
situations qui
site
pourraient surgir.
in order to
C'est pas automatiquement
manage
une
situations as they
intervention
emerge. It's
de la
not
police
automatically
fédérale
an
ou
intervention by the federal
un
police
engagement direct du
or a
fédéral.
direct intervention by the
On est
federal
là pour
government.
donner plus d'outils, y
We're
compris
here
des
to provide
autorités
more tools,
additionnelles
including
aux
additional
policiers
authorities
nécessaires, à la police de juridiction quand ils sont nécessaires.
to
Donc,
whichever police it has
c'est
jurisdiction and
très
is there.
possible, et on
It's quite
l'espère
possible,
même,
and we even hope
que les outils qu'on a mis de l'avant
that the
aujourd'hui
tools
à la disposition de
we
forces
have
policières à
provided to
travers le
police
pays
services across the country
ne seront pas énormément utilisés.
will not
Certainement
to be
pas pendant
resorted to.
longtemps. Ce serait
Certainly not for very
l'idéal que
long.
ces premiers ministres qui disent qu'ils ont tout en main
Ideally,
continuent de garder
these
tout en main.
premiers who say that they have the situation
Mais
in
à un
hand will
niveau
continue to be able to do
national,
so. But
On est
on a
rendu
national
dans
level,
les critères
we have reached
où il fallait agir
criteria
pour donner plus
forcing
d'outils
us to act,
à nos
to
services de
provide
l'ordre
more tools
pour
to
pouvoir assurer le bien-être
those who
de
maintain
tous les
order in our
Canadiens
country,
d'un
to
bout du pays
protect
à l'autre.
all Canadians.
Vous dites que maintenant c'est nécessaire.
Across the
À
country.
Ottawa, on entame la troisième
Question, you're
semaine de
saying that it's
manifestation.
necessary. It's
Pourquoi
been
pas
through, we're in
avoir
the third week
mis
of
en place ces
the
outils-là il y a 2 semaines? Est-ce
these
que
protests in
vous n'avez
Ottawa
pas
now. Why did
manqué à
you not
votre
do this 2
devoir de
weeks ago?
justement
Don't
mettre
you
ces
think that
ressources-là
you
en
failed
place?
in your leadership
Je
responsibilities in
comprends qu'il y ait des
moving
gens qui
forward on this
disent on
earlier?
agit trop rapidement.
Answer.
Il y en a d'autres qui disent
Some
oh
people
non,
will say that
on
we
aurait
moved
dû
too
y
quickly.
agir
Other
il y a
people
des
will say,
semaines.
no, we should have acted
La
weeks ago.
réalité, c'est que
The
la loi
reality
sur les
is
mesures
this.
d'urgence n'est
The
pas
Emergencies
quelque chose à
Act is
prendre à
not
la
something
légère et
to
c'est
take
pas
lightly.
le premier outil
It's not the
qu'on
first
prend, même le
thing you
deuxième
turn
ou le
to,
troisième.
or nor the second, nor the third.
On a été là pour donner plus de ressources dès le début.
We were there to provide additional
À la police
resources from the
locale ici
very
à Ottawa
beginning
et
to
ailleurs.
Ottawa's local police service
Nous avions
and
été
elsewhere.
là pour les
We were
accompagner
there
dans le
to
travail qu'ils ont fait.
support them in the work that they were
Et
doing.
dans les derniers jours,
And in the last few
dans les
days,
rencontres que j'ai eues avec mes ministres,
during
avec nos
meetings I
partenaires,
had
avec
with ministers, with our partners,
les hauts fonctionnaires,
with
ça a été clair
officials,
qu'il y a un besoin d'outils additionnels,
it became clear
c'est
that
ces
we
outils-là,
required additional tools.
limités,
And those tools,
raisonnables et responsables
limited,
qu'on est en train de
responsible,
mettre de l'avant avec la
and
loi sur les
reasonable
mesures d'urgence.
are what we will be
Prochaine
using
question.
through the
Hi, Mr.
Emergencies
Trudeau.
Act.
Mackenzie Gray with
Next
CTV. You
question.
mentioned that the RCMP now have the ability to enforce provincial and municipal laws. Does that mean that they'll be the lead police force agency here in Ottawa? And when can we expect more police officers from the RCMP to work with the City of Ottawa? Because they've been asking for that for a substantial period of time.
As I said, the invocation of the Emergencies Act gives more powers to the police of jurisdiction. It does not make the RCMP automatically police of jurisdiction anywhere across the country. As we have been, we will ensure that the RCMP continues to work to support local police of jurisdiction. And that's what we have been doing in Ottawa. But I think on this question, I'm happy to turn to Minister Mendicino, who can give further information on the situation in Ottawa. Marco?
Yeah, thanks very much, Prime Minister. From the very beginning of the illegal blockades, the federal government has been working closely with local law enforcement where they are the police of jurisdiction, including here in Ottawa. I would point out that we've sent 3 installments of reinforcements to ensure that that Ottawa Police Service has the support that they need. But I think, as we've seen, without question, there have been many, many challenges on the ground to restoring public order on the streets, and one only has to look at the situation on Wellington Street over the past number of weekends. I think it's difficult to overstate the impact of those scenes, the conduct that has unfolded by those who are participating in illegal blockades. It is not just an inconvenience. It is not simply a matter of a trivial interruption. We've seen intimidation, harassment, and expressions of hate. And at times, the scenes on the streets of Wellington have seemed completely lawless. And that is one of the reasons why we've had to take the very careful and deliberate step of introducing the Emergencies Act today, and the declaration and the specific powers, which again are very targeted, they're very proportionate, and they're time limited, so that there can be greater agility between the RCMP, who will work seamlessly with local law enforcement, including in Ottawa, to restore order. I would also say that while we have seen progress, for example, in Windsor, that we should not assume that that progress is linear. And that is one of the reasons why these measures through the declaration are also necessary. We want to be certain that local law enforcement has the concrete tools that they need. For example, tow trucks, which have been very hard to come by. In addition to that, the kind of jersey barriers, which will assist with crowd control, that will ensure that trade and traffic can move very efficiently. And in addition to that, when it comes to the relationship between the RCMP and local law enforcement and provincial enforcement, the provision that is within the declaration will allow the RCMP to be more efficiently assigned to those areas to uphold the law, be they municipal laws, provincial laws, or indeed the designated zones which will be prohibited from assembly because they may cause a breach of peace or may interrupt our critical infrastructure through trade. So when you look at the suite of the measures that we put into place today, and we've certainly put a lot of thought into that, our view is that they are necessary and they will assist us in dealing with the illegal blockades and bringing them to a peaceful and expeditious resolution.
As my follow-up, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Mendicino just mentioned that when you look out on Wellington Street here, you see lawless scenes. Why do you have any faith that the Ottawa Police, after 3 weeks now, is going to be able to turn things around and restore law and order in this area?
In regards to the Ottawa Police, we have been working closely not just the RCMP, but the OPP to ensure that there is a coordinated approach on that. But in terms of confidence in the police, I think we could do worse than turn to our Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, to respond to that. Bill.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. The Ontario Ottawa Police Service remains the police of jurisdiction in the city of Ottawa. But the police services right across Canada and certainly in Ontario have been coming together. And they recently announced on Friday the formation of an integrated command structure for managing this event. And that really brings the resources and the capacities of the OPP and the RCMP to the assistance of the Ottawa Police. We've also had conversations with other police agencies across Ontario, and they recognize the situation here and the importance of ensuring that there are adequate resources. But it's not simply an issue of resources, but also of authorities. And we have been working from the very outset with the municipality and with the province in order to ensure that our police services here in Ottawa and right across Canada have the authorities they need and the resources they need to do the important job. Now, as I said yesterday, policing is a very important institution in our society. We need the police to do their job of upholding our laws, to maintain the rule of law, and to maintain public order and safety in our communities. And we have a responsibility to make sure that they have the resources and the tools that they need to do that job. They have our support. And as that support grows in the city of Ottawa, I have confidence that they'll be able to restore order with the support that we're providing.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You emphasized we're not calling in the military to deal with the situation, but all options, as you said last week, are on the table. So what would it take for you to bring the military into this situation? What would the criteria be, and what would it take for you to make that decision?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals right now. I think what is most important is that Canadians get their lives back, their communities back, their neighborhoods back, and can once again rely on their jobs and the trade and the supply chains that are supporting them and putting food on their tables. The reality is the measures that we put forward today, which have been carefully thought through, will give the tools to law enforcement to be able to move in even stronger and clearer ways against these illegal protests, these illegal occupations and blockades that are hurting Canadians. We will continue to monitor, and we will continue to do the things necessary to keep Canadians safe. But like I said, this Emergencies Act in no way brings in the military as a solution against Canadians. We are empowering law enforcement. I think that's what Canadians want to see.
Over the weekend, Minister Blair expressed that he was a little baffled by the lack of law enforcement he saw. I want to know what you think. Do you agree with him? Or more the laws? What do you make of the policing you have seen to date on Wellington Street and elsewhere in Ottawa?
I think there is a high level of frustration amongst residents of Ottawa that this situation has gone on as long as it has. Certainly the frustration people feel in Ottawa has been echoed across the country and indeed around the world. And it is important that the police of jurisdiction working with the OPP and the RCMP are able to put an end to these illegal protests. The specific and limited measures that we are putting forward today as part of the Emergencies Act will give them further tools. Coordinated response between the Ottawa Police Services, the OPP, and the RCMP working together should be able to respond to these concerns by the citizens of Ottawa who want their cities back.
We'll take one last question in the foyer before turning to the phone.
Yeah, Prime Minister Ryan Hamilton, National Post. Over the weekend, Mayor Jim Watson here in Ottawa made a deal with protest organizers to move more trucks onto Wellington Street and out of residential areas. I'm wondering if you can give me any reaction to that deal.
I know that the City of Ottawa, its police services and its elected officials have been pursuing an end to these blockades. This has gone on far too long. It is no longer a lawful protest at a disagreement over government policy. It is now an illegal occupation. It is time for people to go home. The measures that we've put forward today will be additional tools for law enforcement at all levels to be able to secure an end to these blockades.
You're announcing today rules around preventing banks from dealing with these illegal blockades. The city of Ottawa has dealt with these legal blockades. Don't you find that problematic that they have cut a deal to put more trucks directly in front of Parliament Hill?
We are working in a concerted way on measures that will hopefully restore order to the city of Ottawa and allow residents to get back to their lives. The measures that we put forward today around empowering banks to follow up and to ensure that funds are not used for illegal activities such as blockades will be significantly helpful in reducing the size and impact of these blockades.
Merci. On va maintenant tourner au téléphone.
Thank you.
Opératrice, c'est
We
à
will
vous.
now move to the telephone. Operator,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question will be from, la première question va être de Raymond Fillon, TVA. Please go ahead,
First
à vous
question
la
is from
parole.
TVA.
Merci,
Raymond
monsieur,
Fillon,
monsieur le
please
Premier
go
ministre.
ahead.
À quand
Thank you.
l'entrée en vigueur
Prime
des
Minister,
pouvoirs spéciaux
when will the
de la
special
loi sur les mesures
powers
d'urgence pour
under
les
the
policiers que vous
Emergencies
annoncez
Act
aujourd'hui?
come into effect for police officers that you've announced
L'impact
today?
de
Answer.
cette déclaration est immédiate.
The impact of
Nous
this
allons
declaration is
formuler
immediate.
des politiques et des
We will
propositions
be
spécifiques dans
developing
les
specific
heures
proposals
à
and
venir, dans les
policies in the
jours à
coming
venir qui
hours,
vont
the coming
avoir
days
ces impacts
that
spécifiques.
will have
Mais je
specific
vais me tourner
impacts.
vers le
But
ministre de la Justice qui peut en parler
I
plus
will ask the
longuement.
Minister of Justice to tell you more.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Merci,
Thank
Monsieur
you, Prime
Fillon.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Fillon.
On va déposer des ordres en Conseil
We will be tabling
en
orders
suivant
in
la loi.
council.
Une fois que les ordres
Under the Act,
sont annoncés,
once
ils
the
rentrent en
other measures,
vigueur.
once these measures have been
Et
announced, they
ce sera au
are
Parlement de
they become
regarder
effective immediately.
après, de faire le devoir.
And then
Mais
there will be
les
parliamentary
ordres
review,
rentrent en vigueur
but
tout de suite.
the orders and
Merci.
decrees come into effect immediately.
Merci.
Thank you.
Monsieur Trudeau,
Question.
plusieurs vous ont reproché
Mr.
votre
Trudeau,
ton face
several
aux
people
manifestants ces
reproached
dernières
you for
semaines. Vous
your
accusé
tone
d'avoir jeté
towards
de l'huile
the
sur le feu en
protesters over the
parlant entre
last
autres d'une
couple of
minorité
weeks.
qui
They
est
said you
suspecte.
threw oil on the
Est-ce que vous sentez un
flames.
degré de responsabilité
Do
pour
you feel
l'ampleur
any
que ces
responsibility
manifestations-là
for the
ont pris?
scope that these
Ce qu'on a
protests have
vu
reached?
et ce qu'on voit maintenant à
Answer.
travers le
What we've
Canada, c'est
seen
que bien sûr,
and what we are
les
now
gens
seeing
sont
across Canada
fatigués,
is that, of course,
frustrés, tannés
people
de la
are tired,
pandémie, tannés des
frustrated, sick
mesures
of the
de
pandemic,
santé publique,
tired
veulent que
of
ce soit
public health
fini.
measures.
Tout le monde
They want it to
est
be over.
d'accord là-dessus.
Everyone agrees on that.
Mais ce qu'on a vu aussi,
But
c'est
what
que
we have also
les
seen
Canadiens, à travers le
is that
pays,
Canadians across the
ont
country
été là les uns pour les
were
autres,
there for each other.
ont été là pour s'entraider,
We're there to help
pour
one another,
suivre les mesures de santé publique,
to follow
pour
public health guidelines,
se faire vacciner à un plus haut taux que
to
la
get
plupart de nos
vaccinated
pays
at a higher rate
pairs
than
à travers
most
le monde.
in most of our peer countries across the world.
On a démontré en tant que pays
We have shown as
que
a
les gens
country
continuent d'être là les uns
that
pour
people
les autres. Et
continue to be there for
maintenant,
one another.
les gens qui
Now,
voient leur vie déboussolée
people who are
par
seeing their
ces
lives
barricades ici à
disrupted
Ottawa,
by these blockades
de
here in
voir les
Ottawa,
gens
are
souffrir
seeing
parce
people
qu'il y a
suffering
des blocages aux
because
frontières qui empêchent
borders are being
de faire
blockaded
leur
that
job,
are providing people
that
are preventing
limitent
people from doing their
les chaînes
jobs
d'approvisionnement.
and are curtailing our
Ces
supply
gens-là
chains.
sont fâchés
Those people
et
are
tannés
angry
encore plus
and
et
even
veulent qu'on agisse
sicker of that.
pour remettre de l'ordre dans notre pays, pour
They want us
démontrer
to
qu'on est un
act
pays
to restore order in our
de
country,
règles de
to
droit,
show that we are a
où
country
oui, on
of
encourage
rule of law.
les manifestations paisibles, on
Well, yes, we
encourage les
do
gens
in this country
d'exprimer
encourage
haut et fort
peaceful
leurs opinions, mais on
protests.
n'accepte
We
pas
encourage people to
que
openly
les
and
gens
loudly express their
viennent
opinions, but we do not accept
endommager notre économie et faire mal
people
et
who
brimer les libertés
come and
de leurs
curtail other
concitoyens
people's
par des
freedoms, their
manifestations
fellow
illégales.
citizens' freedoms, and break the laws
Following
and
up,
have
operator.
illegal,
Next question.
use illegal means to protest.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Tonda McCharles, Toronto. La parole.
Thank you. Prime Minister, I didn't hear an answer to the question Mac asked about reinforcements from the RCMP to the City of Ottawa. And if you can answer that, great. But how specifically do you justify giving even more powers to police in Ottawa when many residents and policing experts say the law enforcement here has not used the power they already have under existing laws, that this is a failure of policing leadership, not the need for more power?
Later to reflect on all the lessons that can be learned from this situation. Right now, we are ensuring that local police of jurisdiction have both the legal authorities that they need to do their jobs, but also the extra resources. We have delivered not just RCMP officers, as the OPP has delivered OPP officers to support the City of Ottawa, but we've also provided integrated planning and coordination task force to ensure that we are able to actually see an end to this occupation of Ottawa.
Following up.
Yes, I'd like you to speak, if you could. You mentioned, as did Minister Freeland, the reputational damage to the country that you feel the border protests have had and the impact on Canada's, I guess, reputation as a reliable trading partner. But can you speak a little bit more about just what was the tipping point for you in all of this? Was it really the fact that the White House has been weighing in and burning up the phone lines all weekend to all your ministers? Really, why have you moved to do this?
For me, the conversations I had with our Windsor MP, Eric Kazmierczak, who was talking about the impact of the disruption of the Ambassador Bridge almost as soon as it started happening, the impact on workers in the auto sector in the Windsor area and up the supply chain through Southern Ontario, the direct impact hurting exactly the people that these convoy protesters are purporting to represent. Regular Canadians are hurting in their jobs, in our economic recovery, in their freedoms to travel, to see friends and loved ones on the other side of the border, because of illegal protests and barricades. We have been there to support local police of jurisdiction, and we are now putting forward fresh tools to do that. In terms of the reputational damage, in my conversations with fellow leaders around the world on the situation in Ukraine and others, it has been clear that this is something that democracies around the world are concerned with. Countries that did well during the pandemic with high vaccination rates and strong public health measures are still seeing backlashes against those measures and frustration by people who are tired of this pandemic. And the impact of social media and illicit funding of concerted activities designed to destabilize a country that has the highest vaccination rate of many of our peer countries, Canada, around an issue that is not dividing Canadians. Canadians are united in having been there for each other through this pandemic, and they're even united in being sick and tired of this pandemic. But the way to get through it is not to shut down our economy and hurt our neighbors. And that's something that people understand around the world. And with this measure here today showing that Canada remains a country of the rule of law, that will protect its critical infrastructure, that will support good jobs, that deliver goods and services, not just to Canadians, but people around the world, are going to be protected.
Opératrice, prochaine question au téléphone.
Operator, next question,
Thank you.
please.
Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Boris Proulx, Le Devoir. Please go
Next
ahead.
question
À
is
vous la
from Le
parole.
Devoir. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Quelles preuves
Prime Minister.
avez-vous que les
What proof do
capacités
you have
provinciales ne
that
sont pas
provincial
suffisantes pour gérer
capacities
cette
are
crise?
not
Très content de
sufficient
pouvoir
to
tourner
deal
cette
with the
question vers
situation?
le ministre
That's it.
Lametti.
I'm
Allez.
very pleased to hand the floor to Minister Lametti to answer that question. Minister Lametti.
Merci Boris pour la question.
Thank you for the
Évidemment,
question, Boris.
la réponse se trouve à travers le
Obviously,
Canada,
the answer can be
mais
found across Canada.
et ça se trouve aussi la réponse dans
And
les
the answer
mesures
can
qu'on
also
va
be
prendre.
found in the
Donc,
measures we're going to be
évidemment, on
taking.
va appuyer les
Of course, we're
services
going to support
dont ils ont besoin.
and provide
Mais
them resources that
je
they need.
vous dirige vers
But
les
I would direct
mesures
your attention-
annoncées
I would direct
par
your attention
la
to,
vice-premier ministre,
measures
la ministre des
announced by
Finances
the
aujourd'hui.
Deputy Prime Minister and
C'est
Minister
la
of Finance today.
capacité de
It's the
empêcher
ability
l'utilisation de la propriété privée, les
to
camions,
block the
disons.
use of private
qui-
property, such as trucks.
Si on regarde les drapeaux ici sur la rue
Which, and if
Wellington,
you look
Ottawa,
at
il y a
the
des
flags that
drapeaux de
you're
Québec,
seeing
il y a le
across,
drapeau d'Alberta, il y a
Wellington Street,
plusieurs
you can see several
camions
different flags
enregistrés
with
partout au
Canadian,
Canada.
Albertan, Quebec flags.
Je,
These trucks
je-
are registered across Canada.
je remercie M. Ford
And I
pour
thank Mr.
avoir pris
Ford
des mesures en Ontario.
for having
Mais ce
taken
qu'on a fait
measures in
aujourd'hui
Ontario.
nous
But
permet,
what we've done
et
today
ça va permettre
will allow us
soit une porte d'entrée, soit ici à Ottawa,
either
aux
to
services
do something here in Ottawa
financiers
or at the
à travers
borders or
le
elsewhere,
Canada, de nous aider
or through our financial
à-
services in Canada,
faire, à faire sortir, à dégager les rues. Pourquoi?
it
Parce
will
que
help us
ça touche
unblock the streets.
entièrement le Canada. Et
Because this
c'est dans une telle
applies
mesure,
across
une telle
Canada.
loi, qu'on
And
peut le
under
faire. On ne peut
such
pas le
measures,
faire
under
avec
such
des
an
mesures
act, we can do
provinciales.
so. We cannot do so through provincial
Suivi,
legislation.
Oui, en suivi, Monsieur le ministre,
Follow-up question?
si une
Yes.
province n'en
Minister,
veut pas de cet état
what if a
d'urgence,
province
est-ce qu'elle
does
peut
not want
choisir de
you
s'exclure des mesures d'urgence annoncées aujourd'hui?
apply these measures in their
Non,
province?
selon la
Can
loi,
they ask to be
et la loi a
excluded
été
from them?
rédigée par
Answer, no.
les conservateurs
Under
et
the
M.
act, and
Mulroney
in
en
fact, the
88,
act was drafted by Mr.
nous
Mulroney's
avons devoir de
Conservatives in
consulter
1988.
avec
We have
les
the
provinces, ce qu'on a
duty to
fait.
consult
Euh,
provinces, which we did.
Évidemment, on va continuer à travailler
course, we will
avec les
continue
provinces,
to
ce qu'on
collaborate
a
with
fait et ce qu'on va
provinces,
continuer à faire.
which we have done
Mais
and we will continue
une
to
fois
do.
qu'une
But
une urgence à l'échelle nationale
once
est
a
déclenchée,
national emergency has been declared,
les lois s'appliquent à travers le Canada.
these measures
On va prendre
apply
une dernière
across the
question
whole
au téléphone.
country. One last question on the telephone?
Thank you. Merci.
Un dernier suivi.
Just a quick
Évidemment,
follow-up.
c'est une loi qui s'applique sur l'entièreté
Obviously,
du Canada,
these rules
mais
apply across Canada.
les outils qu'on offre,
But the
les
tools that
actions
we are
qu'on va
offering,
prendre
the
ne seront pas appliquées
measures we
partout
will
à
use
travers
will
le
not be
Canada,
applied
ne
across
seront
the entire
appliquées que
country. They
là
will
où ils
only be
sont
applied
réellement
where they
nécessaires
are truly
en
necessary
travaillant avec les
by
juridictions
working
locales.
with
Donc
local
oui, même si
jurisdictions.
théoriquement,
So, even
l'impact,
though
parce que c'est une loi
theoretically, yes,
fédérale
the
sur les
impact,
mesures
since it is a
d'urgence,
federal
ça s'applique
act,
partout au Canada,
will apply,
ça ne va avoir
would apply
un
across the whole
impact
country.
concret
It will only
que
have a
où
concrete
il y en a
impact
réellement besoin. Et ça,
where it is
évidemment,
truly
c'est pas
needed.
partout au
And
Canada.
that is not everywhere in
Opératrice?
Canada, of course.
Thank
Operator.
you. Merci. The next question is from, la dernière question est de Marieke Walsh de Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Minister Lametti, if I understood him, said that this will apply across Canada and that provinces will not be able to opt out. Your opening statement said that this would be geographically targeted. So can you please explain where specifically in Canada this will apply?
I actually just answered that in French, and I'm happy to repeat it because it is an important point that people need to understand. The Emergency Measures Act, as it is applied when it is a national emergency that touches more than one province, as this one is, necessarily covers the entire country because it is a federal National Emergencies Act. However, the specific provisions that we have laid out in the Act, the measures necessary, will only apply where they are needed. We talked about geographically limited, obviously, to continue to ensure that the Ambassador Bridge remains free and clear for traffic. That is a place where the measures brought in by this Emergencies Act will matter. A small community elsewhere in the country, a long way from borders or critical infrastructure that is not experiencing any significant illegal protests are unlikely to see any impact from these the Emergency Act. This is the element that is limited to where it is needed. And indeed, in places where there is a significant border crossing, where the local police of jurisdiction have no need of additional RCMP support or even the additional tools that we have made available to them, they will not have to use those additional tools. So even though the Emergencies Act applies to the entire country, it is targeted, time-limited, and geographically specific based on need as to where it will actually be felt and have an impact on the ground.
Following up,
Thank you. So can you please clarify then, will it apply in Emerson, Manitoba, Coutts, Alberta, and Surrey, BC? And how will you measure the success of this, that this is not just your government appearing to do something, but that actual results happen?
Well, I think Canadians know well that the measure of success will be, can we get our supply chains back? Can we end the disruption to livelihoods of people who rely on trade to the United States from these border crossings? Can the citizens of Ottawa get back to their daily lives, including, as we saw just a few weeks ago, when a perfectly peaceful protest involving tractors and trucks of potatoes from PEI were on Parliament Hill, highlighting their concern. That is how this country, how protests can unfold. But this illegal end, that is the way of now given specific tools necessary for that. In regards to Emerson and Coutts, one of the issues that we have seen is a challenge in getting tow trucks to actually show up to bring out, to move these large rigs. In Windsor, we relied on this partnership with the Americans to be able to get tow trucks to move the big trucks. Now, with these measures that we've put in place, there will be an ability to compel, for just compensation, tow truck owners and operators to actually do the jobs for which they have contracts with various orders of government to keep highways and roads clear. This is an example of a specific tool that is now available to local police of jurisdiction in places all across the country if needed. It will be to them to determine whether or not that is needed.
merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Thank
This is
you.
what
This
today's
brings
presser.
today's press
Merci
conference
beaucoup,
to an
Bruno.
end. Thank you, everyone.